Good evening. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral, and welcome to the Forum Online. We're so grateful that you're joining us. Every year, Grace Cathedral chooses a theme to help provide focus. It gives us an opportunity to try to grow in new ways as a community. And in 2021, we've decided this is going to be the year of healing. So tonight at the Forum, we're asking, what is the role of philanthropy in our community? And has that role changed during the pandemic? Can philanthropy be an agent of social change, of healing in our community? Tonight, we have the great opportunity to hear from Nicole Taylor, who has a rich background in Bay Area philanthropy, nonprofit administration, and fundraising, with extensive experience in both the private and public sectors. She currently serves as president and CEO of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Nicole, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me. And before we get started, can you tell me how virtual Carnival went?
Oh, it was great. We just had a long conversation about it online with everybody.
Good.
You know, it's a kind of an exclusive affair. You've got very expensive seats and it's a very fancy dinner. And it's always been my wish that we could have more people come to it. And this year I got my wish.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we sold 600 tickets to it. I think 1,100 people watched it online. And then we were actually able to raise the money that we needed to.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Thanks for asking about
it. Absolutely. I know it's a big deal every year. And, you know, the upside to being online is you can do what you just talked about.
Yeah. My wife was the co-chair or the host. She's so good. Oh my gosh. So yeah, my heart was completely in it. I absolutely loved it this year.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. And you know, I've been thinking so much about you and the challenges that you must be facing. I mean, in a way, I think I'm really grateful that you arrived in 2018 to have a little bit of an experience of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation as it's in kind of normal time. Right. And then you were like really settled and you were prepared for this. Yeah. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just like what the challenges of COVID have been both for you as a person and then for the institution too.
Yeah, yes. 2020 was quite a year. You know, personally, I lost my mother right before we went into lockdown. And so I couldn't even really celebrate her life because I have family. I'm a daughter of immigrants, right? Jamaican. So I have family all over the world and they couldn't come together. We couldn't celebrate. So that was a weird beginning to the year. And then we hit COVID. And, you know, just like everybody else, everyone's experienced loss, either directly in their families or just in their communities, right? And just the loss we feel as a broader community and as a society for what the lockdown and work from home has meant and the loss of jobs. It's just been a lot of loss. And one thing that I feel very proud of is what I was able to do in my work life and what my team's been able to do at the Community Foundation. We, like actually community foundations all over the country, stepped up big. This is when I think community foundations really shine. You know, the essence of what a community foundation is to know your communities, to understand, have your ear to the ground, either directly or, you know, I've launched a community advisory council where I can actually hear from leaders of color what's going on. And we galvanized and raised funds and really felt like we were able to be that broker of resources right directly to the need. It was hard. We had to pivot as a dime, as every workplace did, to online. But, you know, we meet more frequently as all staff. You know, there's more lines of communication, I think, open than probably how we used to work. Similar to your event, right? We were able to reach donors in terms of webinars and really interesting conversations in ways that was near impossible given Bay Area traffic before. Like, when you do an event, can somebody who works in San Francisco get down to Mountain View? Probably not during the weekday, right? I mean, so we've really tried to leverage the reality that we're all living in, and make the most of it just day to day, but more importantly, really take this time to bring the humanity into our work and to bring that to donors and encourage them to give like they've never given before, because the need was just so incredible and it continues to be.
Yeah, really, just astounding. I mean, just the changes we're witnessing. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just like what new skills people who work in your office had to learn,
Right.
And then just kind of like how do you address just kind of like, I mean, everybody's suffering, so your staff is suffering, so the people you're trying to serve are suffering.
Right.
How have you dealt with that too?
Right. So new skills. Well, one, there's things. It's so interesting how we used to think about work, right? We had a lot of manual processes, and we're going through this whole digital transformation within the organization and adapting new software and in the cloud and all of that. And but before we could even get to that, we had to figure out how to take some manual processes online because everybody's working from home, and safe and secure and cybersecurity and everything. And we have an amazing IT department. We have a new head of IT who came out from the private sector and wanted to give back. And I'm like, well, we have a job for you. We need your help as we, he came on right at, at an important time for the organization. And, those skills of being able to make the work happen easier, you have to communicate more. You just have to communicate more with your colleagues, with your supervisor, if you're supervisor, with the people, that work on your team. And as the leader, it's communicating both internally and externally. And it's all the time. And it's with the board, and it's with donors, and, media. And before I got on, it's just like, there's a lot of people that vie for leaders' time, right? And they want to understand what's happening. And that was just in COVID. Then we had the murder of George Floyd.
Right, of course.
Okay, so we had to deal with the shift in consciousness, finally, I feel, in this, definitely in this region, but as a broader country, about how are we really dealing with systemic racism in this country? What does this really mean for us, right? And have these conversations in ways that we couldn't a year ago, right? And then there were wildfires, don't forget that. And then there was this little thing called election that was happening. And we had census. I mean, there was a lot going on in 2020, and pivoting with each thing that came that, externally came our way just became the new normal. It really.
Yeah. And then the second question is like, how do you care for your people? Like how has your staff been okay? And
thank you for asking. And that's something that we have, we've been trying, I think, like everybody, and I hope like everybody who has staff has tried to ensure that we're listening. We've had trainings for managers. We've been encouraging managers to have touch bases with all of their staff frequently, right? In the beginning of when we were all working from home, I was like, every day you need a touch point with your staff. Our leadership team met just about every day for a good almost couple months, just so that I could see them and I could hear what was going on, and they could hear from each other and support each other. And so that is what we've been trying to do since this time, almost this time last year, right? Yeah. We do all staff meetings every 2 weeks. And in the beginning, they were longer because there was a lot going on. We weren't sure if and when we were reopening. There was just a lot of adjustments we had to make on vaccine and what different projects people were working on. They're now about an hour. And it's I look forward to seeing the staff and leading those meetings and having other people lead different parts of it. We bring stories from our grantees and from what's happening out in our world. Bring videos of real life work that's happening on the ground that we can't go out and see. We're now doing interviews, bringing people in, other leaders in, to talk about either their perspective and what's happening with the work they're trying to do. So all those little touch points really matter. Our HR team's been great. We send care packages every once in a while. And they vary depending on the season, just as, hey, we're here. We love you. We're all still one team, even though we may be working, wherever we're working. So it's, there's also different circumstances, right? We have a lot of folks who are parents.
Right.
Schools aren't open, right? Yeah. Preschools aren't open. Childcare is not open. K-12 is not open. How to help them deal, and a lot of time that turns to their team members, right? So that's been, as an employer, as a boss, as a leader, that's trying to understand how to gauge and navigate. But as an employee, my son is grown in college, but I can't imagine if he was 5 years old and I was going through this as an employee, how hard it would be. So it's that empathy that you need to have for others in the circumstance who are on your team or in your organization.
I think we actually talk about that a lot in my senior staff. It's just like being a parent, like what insights that gives you as a leader. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. I mean, like what's different because you've gone through all those stages of early childhood and adolescence.
We're in the diaper stage. I'm like, oh boy, I was so happy the day I no longer had to buy diapers. But I remember, right? So
I do too.
I think it is the empathy, and when you have kids, or at least I should just speak from my experience. My son, I was always trying to see the world through his eyes. I'd take him to Disneyland and I'd try to imagine what it might be in this little body looking up at Mickey Mouse or looking up at the rides, or I'd take him to the beach and watch him just dig into the sand and whatever we travel, whatever it was, I would try to put myself in his shoes and just see the world from his perspective. That is something I've carried through my life. Having him really awakened that in me, I would say. And I try to lead that way. What is it like?
I love that, trying to see the person's perspective. I mean, one of the things I think of a lot is just things just aren't as tidy. There's like a level of irrationality just in human life that I think that's one of the things I've learned as a parent, that things just aren't like neat and clean and everything's perfectly clear. It's just, I think parenting just teaches you there's just a pretty big gray area.
Yes, like most of life is gray. And the small stuff is pretty small. Right. Yeah, and also I think the patience, right?
Yeah,
the
sure.
kind of parent that I always strive and still strive to be is patient and present. You have to be present, and if you're not present, your kid will let you know that you're not. Like, Mom, you're not paying attention to me. Like he would say that, because when we all really got into cell phones.
I totally remember that.
Mom, put the phone down and talking to me, and it's like, oh gosh, and I remind myself, I only have a small window with him in my house every day. When he was here for most of the lockdown in the spring and all summer, I cherished.
I did too. I felt the same
way.
I
cherished every moment, every day.
I did.
And then he left again.
Yeah.
And then there goes my heart, right?
Yeah.
But just that learning to be present, absolutely important as a leader. When somebody's talking to you, meeting with you, or you're trying to understand a situation. We had our community advisory council meeting today, and it's like 24 of these unbelievable leaders of color here on the peninsula in the South Bay. And they in all different issue areas, some in healthcare, some in employment, some, their education, they span the spectrum in terms of the issue areas that they deal in. But listening to them and being present and hearing what they were saying about what is it like to lead during COVID? What is it like to talk to your community who's been mistreated by the public health system and the medical system, that it is okay to get the vaccine, and that we need you to get the vaccine. Or there's a leader from the Pacific Islander community who said, we are actually back in April of last year where the rest of the world was. We're still trying to get our people to get tested. And just, you could just see it. And had I been worried about the next question or the next slide, or I see my phone flashing, I wouldn't have been present to really hear them. And then think about, what do we as a community foundation, what roles do we need to play in what we're hearing right now? Because that's the whole reason to bring these folks together, so that they can not only hear what we're trying to do, but how do we respond to what we're hearing?
I love that. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit more about the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, just so we know, the history of it. And
so it was formed out of a merger, about 12 years ago now. And it was then and has continued to be the largest community foundation in the country and actually globally. And, which is a real honor and real responsibility to have that as the reality. Our donors are extremely philanthropic. While they have given a significant amount of resources to the community foundation, usually through donor advice funds is their vehicle of choice. They've also granted out each year a tremendous amount. Um, our our every community foundation has a geographic region. Some are statewide in different parts of the country. We are blessed here in the Bay Area to have four incredible community foundations right in the inner part of the Bay, Marin, San Francisco, East Bay, and Silicon Valley. But if you just go, a couple counties out, we have Santa Cruz, we have Solano, we have Napa, we have Sonoma. So there's 8 of us in the 10-county Bay Area region. Not surprising given the wealth and both the wealth and the needs in our greater Bay Area region. So our part of the region is San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. Those are the counties that we know well. Our donors support the entire Bay Area region, and we are probably one of the largest, if not the largest, grantor or supporter of nonprofits in the greater Bay Area region. So in 2020, we distributed $1.9 billion in grants total, and almost 25 million of it stayed right here in the Bay Area.
Wow.
And
That's great.
yeah, so our donors are indeed giving locally. We've also been working really hard to get information about organizations and the needs and where they can have impact. And it's something that I've really taken on as I've come on board is how do we become a regional catalyst, a connector, a collaborator in our region and in our part of the Bay Area region, right? How do we bring together the resources and skills of our donors, of the companies? We work with over 60 companies.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. What's your relationship to the tech community, and just kind of like what's the breakdown between just individual donors versus companies?
So most of our donors are individuals. We have over 1,800 individuals and families, right? Some are individuals and some are families that work with us. We have 60 companies who do their corporate giving through us. Vast majority are right here, as you can imagine, in our backyard down here on the Peninsula and South Bay, and we work with them on their corporate giving and have, those are the relationships that we have. Again, like any community foundation, that's what we do as a field. It just looks a little different because of the region that we're situated in, right? It would make sense that we're large because of the enormous scale of wealth and resources that are here. It would make sense that we work with tech companies that happen to be global companies because those are the companies in our backyard, right? Other community foundations do the same thing in their region. So that's so we are reflecting what the business of a community foundation is. And we promote philanthropy in the region and support philanthropists and companies to invest in impact. And they come to us, as some know exactly, I'm going to try to turn the light up here. Some know exactly what they want to give to and just need our help facilitating it. And others are like, not quite sure. I'm interested in oceans, or I'm interested in water. I'm interested in education. And then, we work with them to help really hone in on their goals. And ideally bring them ideas and
that's great.
Almost curate for them kind of things that are out there that they should be and could be investing in.
It's a question I think about. I just, there's so many different kind of entities in our complicated modern world.
Yes.
There's government entities, there's individuals, there's, churches, there's other nonprofits. And I wonder if you can talk about just kind of like the space that community foundations operate in.
Mm-hmm.
Like what kind of projects are best for community foundations versus say government
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think for most community foundations, we work in tandem or in partnership with multiple other sectors. And the way I see it is we are all part of this ecosystem and we bring what we do best to the table. So we can aggregate capital and distribute capital and invest it and figure out impact. We can work alongside and leverage public sector dollars, which we do quite a bit. We did it in census. We helped donors give to ensure we had fair and safe elections all over the country. Right. So we had a number of donors that gave through us, and our staff actually worked with the staff of these organizations that ensured we had a safe election process across the country. right? And a lot of that was in, those organizations worked in with secretaries of state and election officials in other states. So that is, I see it as complementary, right? We've all got to figure out the roles we can play in an ecosystem in a region, and where the big investments need to be made, which quite frankly are in the public sector. They have vast majority of the resources. They control the policies, right?
Yeah.
They enact and enforce policies. So how do we work with them to ensure that the best of that work is done for our communities?
Yeah,
So,
no, that's great. That's a great answer.
And
when I live
too, we do the same with private sector, right? Because people say, well, where do companies and where do private sectors, investors and venture capital and private equity, where does all that play in terms of creating change and making change? And we also believe it's our responsibility to work and partner with the private sector and figure out how they can best leverage their dollars and their resources, because they're sitting here, their employees work here, they're, many of those top executives are raising their families here, right? So they care about the community. How do we actually help them and help them the mission of giving back that their companies have? So
yeah. We used to live in Mountain View for like 14 years. And yeah, so I mean, we know so many of your donors, and we've been I guess we've probably been involved in the story of SVCF since the very beginning. But
I'm sure.
This is a tough one, because I remember being down there. I mean, basically, I lived in Mountain View, so I could ride my bicycle to Google, and I could ride my bicycle to Apple. Right. And I remember Apple. I remember Google, feeling like Google was investing a lot in the community. And I remember Apple saying things like, well, we're going to increase shareholder value, and then the shareholders will increase in their communities. And I just wonder how you deal with that kind of argument, in terms of, I mean, how do you help tech companies and other large entities like that to see the value in investing in that local community?
Right. So I will say it's a lot easier now.
Yeah, good.
I will say 2020 made it a lot easier to have conversations. There is one leader down here, Chuck Robbins, who's the CEO of Cisco, who prior to me taking on this role has been beating the drum about giving back to their backyard, right? All of these companies that have their headquarters here, large workforces here, how do they really activate and give back right here and invest where they're growing and where they're working? He's incredible and a model of the kind of leadership that this region needs, and I think every region needs a Chuck Robbins, right? And many totally do, right? When 2020 happened and all that happened in it, people couldn't ignore it anymore. Everyday people couldn't ignore it. People who work in whatever kind of company, people work in tech companies, leaders, you couldn't ignore what was happening in your town, in your city. Small businesses closing, your favorite restaurant closing, your kids' schools are closed. You're worried about the increase in homelessness because now people are out of work.
Right. I've got a friend of mine who I see every day. He's homeless, and I stopped seeing him for 4 months. And I just saw him today, and he said, "Malcolm, I'm alive." I mean, I was just like, oh man, it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking, and we're not out of the woods, right? And your health is dependent on my health, and my health is dependent on your health. So it didn't matter if you were running a global company, or if you were an hourly worker, a cashier at a store. Our lives actually depended on each other in 2020, right? So, and then George Floyd, Nicole Taylor, and over and over again, and you couldn't ignore that either.
Yeah.
Because guess what? Everybody was home watching it on their phones over and over and over again. You couldn't ignore that our fates, our lives were inextricably linked.
Yeah.
And that reality, the Orange Day of the fires.
Right. Oh my gosh, completely. Okay. Yeah, we saw a disaster movie. We saw that Greenland movie where the comet has lived. It was scarier here because it was a beautiful sunny day the whole time there.
The whole time, and then all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Right?
It was nighttime. It never became day.
Right. Okay, so like you can't ignore it.
Yeah.
Right? Our fates are tied together. And it's made the conversation about giving back easier to have. Well, the conversation is now how and where. And I add how much.
Yeah.
I add that part too.
I'm glad.
Like,
That's a
give
good
a little
one.
more. You can give a little more. It's okay. You can give it a little more because there's a lot of people doing that did quite well in 2020 as it turned in terms of investments and things. And a vast majority of people did not. So it's, it's made it easier to have those conversations. And I put out a call to our donors twice, one in April and another one in October, about giving. At first it was up to 5%, and then I'm like 5 to 10% more of what you would normally do because the needs are still here. And people responded.
Yeah.
I mean, people really responded.
Yeah, I loved, I mean, I read all the newspaper articles and I was delighted to see, I mean, you're right. I mean, we saw that our lives are connected with one another, and it did draw people to be more generous. And it made me very happy. I wonder, if you know much about like the history of philanthropy, like in America, like do we go through different phases? How does it change? How is it different in say our parents' generation?
So a really great question. And it's also changed. It looks different on the West Coast than it does on the East Coast.
I was wondering about that. Regional differences would be a huge thing, I bet.
Yeah, it looks different. And that also speaks to the history of philanthropy, because philanthropy, traditional institutional philanthropy, started on the East Coast, right? And it was, and community foundations started in Ohio, actually. So over 100 years ago. So, but philanthropy started, east of the Rockies. So when you had large families, you had large amounts of wealth and generational wealth, that started what we now know as some of the more traditional philanthropic institutions, Ford, Carnegie, Rockefeller, right? And had this history of giving. So many of my colleagues on the East Coast, community foundations, have large endowments, like one or two large endowments, because of families that gave and recognized the community foundation as this community chest, this community trust, and gave to this trust on behalf of future generations. Well, as we move west, that becomes less so. There are still there's some venerable families who gave and were extremely philanthropic here on the West Coast. Silicon Valley, that wasn't our story, right? I mean,
Los Altos didn't exist 100 years ago.
We were orchards back then, right?
Yeah.
And Stanford gave to Stanford, right? They started a university, right? So the wealth here is newer, and there was less of a sense of that community chest and less of a sense of the endowments, and that's how philanthropy, in terms of our part of the region. San Francisco looks different, but because of the history of the city versus this part of the region, and so we see it in terms of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. We have a relatively small endowment, and we have a good size of donor advised funds. Many of our donors treat their donor advised funds as endowments in terms of them wanting to give long term, but there's less of that sense of a community chest or endowment building as we have on the East Coast.
Yeah, that's interesting. We have the same thing. I mean, some of our donors basically, we don't want to give money to the cathedral because we can manage the money better. And that's,
right. Or you're like, but
what happens? There's
exactly. So I think it just forces us to be a little more innovative and creative as we talk with donors and talk with philanthropists about what and how they give, right? And what investment really needs to look like. And again, those conversations are getting easier because everyone saw what happened in 2020, and the inequity has just ballooned. It was inequitable before, particularly down here. It was inequitable before, and it is just astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, that's one element, and then the other element, it's like a massive spirituality crisis. I mean, it's just there's so much brokenness and so much pain, and you're right. It's connected to all these different things that you've been talking about.
Yeah.
But you and I have one thing in common. My mother was born, it wasn't a citizen. She became a citizen when I was young. And your mom was Jamaican. And I wonder, like, if you can talk just a little bit, like, about what
Yeah.
growing up in that household was like. And just like, I
Yeah.
think that any household where you have kind of one foot in America and one foot not in America just kind of changes your experience of things. I wonder if
Oh,
you can talk a little bit about
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just any household. So my mom was a domestic for a Chinese Jamaican family.
Right.
So we had a Chinese culture, Jamaican culture, and I grew up in LA, right? So sitting in Southern California. And so I actually got to see the world as not only the daughter of an immigrant, but the daughter of an immigrant who was a domestic for a relatively, well-to-do family.
Yeah.
And that the hard work that I saw her do every day of my life, and knowing that I wanted better for us. She raised me as a single mother. I was part of that family. We lived in the same
Yeah,
house.
right.
And she would always tell me that education was the way out, and that I was going to have a better life than she did, as many immigrants tell their kids, right? You're going to do better than me. That's why I came to this country. And she would encourage me to be the best I could and to do better than everyone else, which is also a very familiar story to many immigrants, is you got to be better. And especially and immigrants and people of color, at least in our generation, we were told you had to be better than the best just in order to be seen.
Right.
And just in order to be recognized. And so I took that to heart, and it led me through my life. I was a great student, got a full ride to Stanford, 2 degrees from there. And, people are always worried about me burning out. I'm like, that's not possible. It's my DNA. It's just,
we've already tested that hypothesis.
Right. I'm the kind of person who runs into the fire while everybody's running out. I'm like, I think we can figure out how to get this out. Right. So, and build whatever was there better. And
it's interesting too. I mean, I wonder just about just your experience with the family that your mom was working for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just wonder how much that has helped you. I mean, there's like a lot. I mean, like, if you look at like who you are today, maybe you can talk a little bit about just like what you learned as a child that kind of got you.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize until I was older how much I was exposed to, because I was living in with a family that had resources, right? And I learned to snow ski, water ski. They had a cabin. They had they had resources. They were entrepreneurs themselves and had successful businesses. And I was exposed to things as a very poor child, because she was unpaid for many years, that my mother could have never exposed me to. And so all of it just creates who I am and my ability and how I move through the world. That empathy thing, also understanding different, perspectives of people that I would engage in, whether they were extremely affluent and wealthy or living on the street. Like, I could see both. We go back to Jamaica, and I saw where my mother was from. They did not have running water.
Right.
They have wells. Right. She's from a part of the country that when she was growing up, the kitchen wasn't in the house. It was outside in a separate place. The bathroom was an outhouse. There was no running water, right? That is where my mother's from. When I go back to the family home, they have running water now, but it's from the well, right? The kitchen's in the house now, but it's very different. That is, a developing nation's poverty compared to our poverty. So to see that kind of poverty here in this country still hits me hard, and it's probably why I continue to do what I do. My mother would always also tell me that I was blessed, I was fortunate, I was smart, and I needed to use all that and give back. Like, I wasn't just given these gifts, and I didn't just develop, the talents and expertise. She expected me to give back. And she was gracious and would help everyone and was open, and I saw that, and I don't know any other way to be, because she was my model.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, if you look at the things that you've done in your life, I mean, you've worked in so many different areas, yet that's like seemed like the one thread that kind of brings all those things together.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah.
how do you care for other people? How do you leave the world a better place
Right.
than the place that you found?
Right. It's how do I do it? It's like every day, chip away at it every day, right? There's some questions coming in about our vision and the housing crisis and other things that I see folks are asking. And
Yeah, well, let me interrupt you just
yeah,
for a second. One of the things that we do, I hope we told you about this. We take questions from our audience, and so then Rebecca sends me the questions by text, and so
okay.
I can start sharing those questions. And you're
Yeah,
right.
so I looked
The
at a
first
couple.
question is, what is the foundation's vision for
Yeah,
2021,
to
2022? Which sounds
2022. Yeah, and
great
then it
question.
actually it speaks to the question you just asked me. So we went through strategic planning process as most new CEOs will do in their organization. I know you've been you
Yeah, we've done two
strategic
already.
planning
We've had two already.
two already, right? And we finished it right February, March last year, and then COVID hit. And we were able to lean into the vision that we had, which I'll lay out in a minute, because we had to step up, because our communities needed it. We didn't have time to figure out committees and who's going to implement what and what is that going to look like. I thought it was going to take us a couple years to really lean into it, and we had to lean in pretty quickly. The one was so we had four main goals of our it's kind of our vision, and our vision is to ensure that everybody has a safe, healthy, fulfilled life, really. And first is systemic inequities, that we are going to deal with racial disparities, social justice, systemic inequities. The second was to help build and serve a strong and engaged community. And the third was to create a culture of effective philanthropy in our region, not just with our donors, but in the region, right? And the fourth was to become an enduring, trusted institution for the community, right? And we had to do all of that pretty much overnight once COVID hit, right?
Right.
And then once it came out, who was the hardest hit? It was communities of color and immigrant communities and low income and low wage workers, right? And then George Floyd got murdered, and then cries of racial justice. So we were able to really think about systemic inequities. Then you look at people were on the verge of being evicted because they couldn't pay their rents, and that was before we figured out what to do on eviction moratoria and how to help small landlords, right? Before any of that, we dove in, and with partners, we realized we needed to raise money to literally help individuals and families literally get money into their hands so they could keep food on the table, so they could keep housed. Otherwise, we would have had a horrific, we thought homelessness was bad before, it would have been horrific, right? So, and then this culture of effective philanthropy is what I was talking to you about, right? Like, how do we get not just our donors, but how do we get an entire region thinking about giving and giving more and really investing here locally? So that is what we've mapped out. And we have, we're going to be doubling down on early childhood education, doubling down on housing and homelessness, particularly for extremely low income and very low income folks. And we are going to be looking at this whole area of economic mobility and economic opportunity. We have to in this region.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one of the questions we got from one of our audiences, African Americans have been excluded historically by law and practice from home ownership. Does your foundation become involved in facilitating home ownership?
Right.
Housing is always such an issue.
Yeah, it is. Housing is a vexing problem in this area, really in this entire region. That we had this conversation today with our community advisory council about how you actually help communities who've been systemically and systematically excluded from building wealth and from passing wealth on to generations. And so we haven't figured it out, but we know that this has got to be part of how we recover. We're not going to recover back to what was. It wasn't working for 90% of the people, at least in the South Bay and the Peninsula. Like, how do we actually figure out that key to help people either get to home ownership or get to acquisition of real wealth so that they can get out of poverty and get generations out of poverty? So we literally just spoke about that today and had some advice and just some encouragement from our community leaders in terms of how to do it. So now that we're out of the real crisis of 2020, because we were all in, it was crisis after crisis, we are now thinking through what is the longer term strategy that we need to have, particularly housing part of it.
And that's one of the big things we talk about all the time is that things are changing so much. You can't set anything up based on how things are right now, because it's such an idiosyncratic, once in a lifetime moment. But we will need to be coming up with what our plans are and how this.
So soon, stay tuned. We are formulating that, and we are planning to partner with others, particularly on this recovery, because the recovery is going to take a long time. I mean, we're still not at a recovery place.
Right, we're really not. Same with us. There's so much uncertainty too, just about when we can gather, when we can do office work, when we can go to like hospitals. I've been to hospitals during the pandemic, but man, I sure don't know if it's a good idea for me to do it. But I've been doing it. But we're wondering, and it's going to change. I mean, 13% of Americans have received the first vaccination, and it's going to be very different when 60 or 70% of us.
Exactly.
Does your foundation give to, here's another question from the audience. Does your foundation give to arts organizations which are barely staying alive? Oh, good. I'm glad. I've been worried about our artists.
Yes. So during the pandemic, we launched several funds, again, because it was a crisis. We had that first regional fund, which we worked with our other community foundations to get dollars in all 10 counties directly to individuals and families. We started a fund for nonprofits. And there was a special kind of carve out for the arts organizations. We also had an education fund, a childcare fund, and a small business fund. So those were all our relief. Now that we're moving back to our new normal and getting into support, what does our support now look like outside of crisis? We are doing small grant rounds, meaning fast get simple RFP out, simple application out, get people general operating support, and we're doing it category by category. So the arts is a category. I believe that one actually closes on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. But you should check our website because we have like 7 different categories.
I was very aware that we're expediting the process. I mean, that's I think one of the biggest changes is just that foundations are kind of expediting processes, making it simpler to figure out for applicants.
And that, I don't think that's going to go away,
because
it also changes the power dynamic, I think, or starts to change the power dynamic between foundations, funders, donors, and those doing the work on the ground. Because I'm saying to you, I believe in you, Malcolm, I believe in you. So I'm going to give you general operating support, and I believe you know exactly what to do with it. Rather than I'm going to just fund this program right here, or actually, can you turn that program into something that fits my mission more than it does your mission?
That's interesting.
We don't have such a great track record in philanthropy. So
my sense
is I know. I've been on the other side too. So I do know. But I do think that it's going to stick. This idea of general operating support, capacity building, and believing in the organizations and listening to them when they tell you what they need and why they need it, and just say, here, okay, do the good work.
One of the things I love about your work is not just that have been involved in universities, but you're a teacher. I mean, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just kind of my daughter's in college, and she's in a special concentration for education, and she comes home and she just blows my mind. I learned so much from her. But I wonder what you think about just education now and just how things have changed since you were in the classroom, or I mean, just and just what your thoughts are about as a parent and a professional.
As a parent whose son is going to college in his bed with his laptop, as most college students right now. Right? If you're in college, you're not actually in class. You're doing it all online. He actually likes it better. That's just the way.
A small percentage of people do. There actually a small number of people are just thriving in COVID. They just it suits them.
He's one of them. I was really worried it was going to be the opposite.
Yeah.
It is really tough. I think about what it would be like if I was still in higher ed. Really tough decisions. Everybody's trying to navigate and figure out the best thing. Nobody has the perfect solution, right? K-12 or pre-K to 12, really tough. How do you teach 6-year-olds on through a screen, right? Squirrely, wonderful, excitable
Yeah.
6-year-olds through a screen, right? Lot of challenges. And, I haven't met a teacher who doesn't want to be back in the classroom. That's why they became teachers, right? And I haven't met a parent that doesn't want schools to open. Kids, jury's still out. It depends on which kid, which day that you talk to. It's really tough right now, but I would encourage your daughter and others to stick with it. We are going through a season. I think you preach about seasons, right?
Yeah,
You're going through a season, and education's going through a season. I think we're going to be facing even more inequity. We have had far too many families who still don't have the right equipment, still don't have reliable Wi-Fi and internet connections. Parents who are working and trying to teach and support their kids at the same time.
Yeah.
We have got to change our perception of the kind of support all of these students are going to need moving forward. There's only
it's so true. I just think of those, you're talking about the Pacific Islander communities, right. And I just think of the Tongans and the Fijians and just how tight knit those groups are and how they gather together in local parks. And
right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how they're going to do this.
It's tough. It's tough. It's and leaders are trying to, I'm thinking about superintendents and principals are trying to figure this out live, and it's really hard. It's really hard. And and teachers who are really worried about their own health and safety for good reason, right? And then parents who are really concerned about getting back to work, or business owners about opening up, and if they can get employees who have kids. It is not easy. It is not easy, but I think this is a season, and I've gotta feel that as a country, we can come out better. We've just got to put our mind and our will to it.
Yeah, definitely. There have been so many newspaper articles lately about like professionals leaving the Silicon Valley and moving to other places. And I wonder if that's just anecdotal things like news reports,
so
how it affects philanthropy.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been following that because of all this. And then today I saw a headline, and I was too busy to read it, that say it's not as accurate as one would think, that not as many people are leaving as we think are leaving. So I haven't been able to read that article to see what it actually meant. I'm concerned that those who can and have the means will leave and can leave and have left. And what does that leave in their wake?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Both in everything from tax base to companies to jobs. What does that leave in their wake? And who's left if significant resources do leave this region? How do we take care of each other? So that's what I get concerned about. Just the little bit I read was that actually there's been even more investment in terms of venture and private equity going to companies now than people expected. So it doesn't look like there's the mass exodus, but I think again, the jury's still out to see what happens. I've had requests to speak about Californians, especially from this region, going to other states and communities outside of California, and what their philanthropy looks like, what their community sense is, because they are bringing Bay Area values into other communities, and they're bringing traditions of giving to other communities. So I've been tapped by peers to say, we need to understand who these new folks are in our communities. And Californians they're going, Nevada, they're going to Denver, Wyoming, they're Colorado, they're going to the Dakotas, they're going to, they're going.
Yeah, I was so heartbroken when I spoke on the phone for about half an hour with one of our congregants who moved away. And it was just like, when someone leaves, you just are aware of what they are, the way they build up the community. Yeah. And when someone new arrives, you don't have any idea what their gifts are going to be or how they're going to.
Right.
But anyway,
So it's been interesting. I've gotten 3 requests for that just in the last
that's
week.
so interesting. Yeah, to be an expert in the philanthropy of Northern California.
Yep.
That's cool. One of the questions one of our viewers asked is, do you have any advice on how to go about starting an NGO? I thought that was an interesting question.
Yeah, I first asked, why do you want to start one, and do you know what already exists in the issue area that you are working in? That I've asked that for the decades I've been in this work, and I especially would ask that when I worked in universities, because you have these great students who are like, I'm going to start a nonprofit that does X. And I said, great, before you actually start it, why don't you see what the landscape has and who's doing work in the area that you care about? And I say that particularly now because of how hard it is to, for even the organizations that exist to continue getting the funding they need, to continue to keep their doors open, and to continue to serve the people they're serving or their mission that they're serving, just because of the times we're in. So that's usually the first question I asked. What do you know about who's doing the work that you're interested in? And even if it's not exactly what you're thinking about, who's in that industry, that part of the industry, who's doing any work in that area, right? So say you want to do an NGO that's working with women and girls. Fantastic. Where are you thinking about it? What specific area of supporting women and girls? And you need to do the homework on who else is doing similar work, and start by engaging and talking to them about what they're doing. And if what your idea is can actually add value to what they're doing, if they're already doing it and you just didn't know about it, or if there's a way that you can partner with them, and before you branch out on your own. It's just thought process and some work that I always encourage people to do before they launch on their own. Funding sources, foundations and others, kind of know who's out in the landscape. So if you go to a foundation and say, I'm starting this organization for women and girls, I'm going to be like, okay, but here are 20 right here in the same region that you're talking about. Have you talked to any of them? So, so it's just something that I ask. And then I
love that. I think that's so wise, just to really get a sense for the landscape and who's doing what.
Yes.
To be sure that you're filling an important need.
Yeah.
Another question we got from our viewing audience is, does your foundation give to wildlife conservation organizations? And how about ocean conservation organizations? I love that question, because that's one of the things I love most about Northern California is our regional parks and
yes, exactly. So we actually have donors who give to both.
Great.
And so our dollars have not been focused on those 2 issues, but we have donors who've given, and we have a donor circle on the environment. And one of the things we try to do again is match donors' interest with work on the ground.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes, and the organizations that are doing the work.
I've been so fascinated with just recovering from COVID. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the Silicon Valley Recovery Roundtable. I mean, I think that'd be, there's not many meetings I want to add to my calendar, but I think those meetings would be interesting. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, they were. And the most intense part happened over the summer.
Yeah.
It was like, 10 weeks, I believe. And there were 59 leaders that were asked to be part of the Recovery Roundtable. That was, we were all asked by Mayor Sam Liccardo of San Jose to come together and identify the areas that were going to be of greatest need for us as a region to focus on. And it was primarily focused on Santa Clara County, with some of San Mateo County folks and parts of Southern Alameda County as well. But really primarily focused on Santa Clara County, because San Mateo County also had a recovery, kind of a recovery roundtable themselves. And over the course of the 10 weeks, we adopted, kind of immediate, how do we reopen? Because that was, it was summer, remember? So people were thinking everybody was going to go back in the fall.
Right.
So there was some immediate, how do we open immediately? How do we think about the area that I was leading? It was about equitable recovery. Like, how do we get equity in everything as a lens? How do we deal with those who are facing the most vulnerable circumstances? those who've been, who don't have access to the federal dollars because of their immigration status.
Right.
How do we actually identify with economic mobility in a recovery, and how do we help build, what does that look like? What do jobs look like? What does workforce development look like? What we even had conversation about financial payments, like what payment systems do we need to really be thinking about as we recover? And then, there was a digital divide conversation.
Oh, right.
That is still huge, right? Because it's not just about kids and learning, it's about their parents. So we can have this conversation because we have the ability to, right? We have access and ability. So many don't. So if more of the work trends to be online, even when we can go back to our offices, who gets left out?
Right.
There's that huge divide, right?
Yeah. We talk about that all the time.
Right. Digital inclusion. So and the other thing is how we frame it, right? So instead of framing the divide, how about if we talk about digital inclusion? That automatically just changes how are we about being inclusive? So it was pretty intense. And there were a number of recommendations that came out of it. And I have to say, everyone was engaged. Everyone. And a lot of big global companies, CEOs were at the table. We also had nonprofit leaders at the table. We had education leaders at the table. It was, President Stanford was at the table. The president of the community college in downtown San Jose was at the table. We had, nonprofits like mine, large ones, but we had smaller nonprofits. We had a woman who runs the Day Labor Center in Mountain View was at the table. So we had this cross section of folks, investors and VCs were at the table, and we all took it very seriously and came up out of the box thinking, how do we know how to do that, right? Isn't that what Silicon Valley is about?
Completely. It's exactly.
Innovatively about what recovery meant. And to a person, we were like, we are not rebuilding. This is about building a better normal, right? Building something better that works for everyone, not just the ones at the top. And many recommendations. I forget the number. I'm sorry, I should remember. Many, over 30 recommendations came out. And now we're at the point of seeing who's made movement on the different recommendations. Joint Venture Silicon Valley has just put out a survey, who's doing what in any of the areas. And we are going to be forming a partnership actually with a few of our folks, including Stanford and Joint Ventures and other folks in our region about how do we take these recommendations and actually get moving on them, and what kind of investment do we need to make? What resources are really needed to move forward? So more to come on that. We're just at the beginning stages of thinking through that.
Oh, so great. I'm just makes me happy to know people like you are working on those problems.
Trying every day.
Yeah, because you're right. It needs to be something new. Not we can't just go back to what we were before.
Right.
Well, I can't even believe it. It just seems like 3 minutes that we've been talking about.
Oh my gosh, it's already time.
It is. We're done. Our time is up. I'm really sorry. For all of you who are watching, please join us next week when my guest will be the pandemic expert, Dr. Larry Brilliant. Isn't he lovely? He's one of my favorite human beings. We got a really good series of people this year. I'll be asking him to reflect on the first year of COVID-19 and what we can expect in 2021. You can help bring the arts to life at Grace with a gift to the forum today to the forum. Please text Grace to 76278 or visit gracecathedral.org/give to Grace. And thanks. It's been such a pleasure to have you, Nicole. Like I said, it gives me such hope for the future to know people like you are working on these just intractable problems and bringing so much hope to people.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we'll continue to follow you as you continue to do this really, really important work.
Oh, great! Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good night, everybody.
Okay. Good night.